Johnny McGonigal here. Bob Flounders there. Max Ralph en route to Japan, going and hanging out over there. I believe he's seeing the Cubs. I believe he's seeing the sights. I believe he is getting some exotic Kit Kat bars and bringing them back for us. I hope. Fingers crossed, Bob.
Yeah, it was that, or I said, look, my first preference was Saki. He sounded like he was not willing to go through the customs hassle, but I think exotic Kit Kats. It's a nice fallback option. He's got a long flight. Hoping he travels safe, and he'll be back with us in about 2 weeks, a little bit less than 2 weeks. But Johnny, excited to do this with you. I think we have an interesting topic. Go for it, buddy.
Spring camp breakouts, Bob. We've got spring camp coming up for Penn State in a matter of a couple weeks, maybe even less
Yeah.
than that by the time we record this on Thursday, March 13th. Penn State spring camp going to be getting going. We've already seen a handful, well, really not a handful, all Penn State's position coaches throughout winter workouts acknowledge guys who are standing out to them. 4 workouts in, I believe 2 to go before spring camp starts towards the latter end of the month. But Bob, we wanted to just kind of bounce off each other here a little bit this Thursday podcast and pick 5 guys each who we think could be breakout stars. You know, there's always the spring breakouts, the guys you come away from spring camp talking about that because James Franklin and the assistant coaches are talking about and teammates are talking about them, and that have that momentum and that confidence and that good vibes going into summer and ultimately going into training camp for the 2025 season at this point. So we wanted to pick out a handful of guys to acknowledge, to recognize, to kind of point out to all you listeners before spring camp starts as potential breakout stars. So, Bob, I know that you've got an extensive list. We're doing 5 each, and I think you wrote down 10 just in case I took a guy or 2 or 5 from you.
Yeah.
Why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, not a big deal. Just rattle them off the top of my big brain. Do it all the time. Hey, quick 10 breakout players. I would just add for the fans that, so our definition of a breakout might be a little different. I just think these are players that, they could have helped Penn State last year, but either by circumstance or by, players moving on, they're definitely in line. They could either be a true, hey, they didn't do much at all last year, and now they have a key backup role or could push to start, or they could just build on, I think, what they did last year and have a prominent role, a difference making role on this Penn State team. So they're probably different degrees of breakouts. We're going to start with the one, Johnny, that I want to start with. We talked about this guy. He was on your most important list. Check that out, by the way, on Penn Live, Penn State fans. Detailed list. He went 1 through 25. It's up there. You can find it. But for me, the guy that I think I am most sure about, assuming good health, is Elliott Washington, the corner. And, sometimes the Penn State coaching staff, Penn State fans, and Johnny, obviously you know this too, they kind of send messages during the winter workouts. Either they don't list you or they kind of list you a bunch of times, just trying to let everyone know, hey, you might want to follow these guys. Elliott Washington has all of the tools. Third-year player, all the skills. He dealt with, I think, some injuries last year, but highly recruited kid, coveted kid, can do it all. Very active, very good, I think, in man-to-man coverage. And I just think when you look at Penn State's corner room, Jalen Kimber is a guy they need to replace. But I think they feel good, led by A.J. Harris. I think they feel, Johnny, really good about their top 4 or 5, and they're definitely going to play 4, 5, or 6. I think Elliott Washington could be a guy that is just going to be a key piece in Jim Knowles' defense. Terry Smith does a great job getting young players ready to go, and he's played a lot of football already when he's been healthy. I like a couple guys, but this is the guy I feel like if he's healthy, I would say this would be my number 1 breakout candidate in spring. And I think if he's healthy, we're going to hear a lot about the coaches talking about him, and you're going to see him a lot on the field in the fall.
I love it, Bob. I mean, he made my list for a reason. I believe he was 16 or 17 on the list, and he could have been a hell of a lot higher too. There's a lot of really good players and a lot of really important players when you look at this team on both sides of the ball. But man, Elliott Washington is up there, and what he's shown, over the last year, rotating in as that outside corner behind Jalen Kimber, as you mentioned, and
Yeah.
AJ Harris, AJ Harris, man, I think.
Yeah.
I like
Already
he's not
broke
even-
it out. Already broke it out.
Yeah, he's talk about a guy who could ascend to like Joey Porter Jr. status,
Yeah.
AJ Harris, but opposite him, Elliott Washington, super important for this defense. You said Elliott might be your number one. This guy who I'm like, he's not my number one necessarily, but he is a player who really intrigues me by virtue of not being in State College at all last year and being in State College the previous year. It's King Mack, the safety transfer from Alabama,
Yeah.
who left Penn State. He came to Penn State as a top 100 recruit from Florida. One of the best DBs in his recruiting class. He didn't have as big of a role maybe as he thought he would as a true freshman. Played on special teams, saw the field, but went to Alabama, for an opportunity, more playing time, maybe a little bit of a bag. Who knows? The SEC likes to throw it around a little bit, but he comes back to Penn State after not making much of an impact at Alabama, finding that the depth chart ascension wasn't as easy in Tuscaloosa as he thought it might be. But now you look at the depth chart at Penn State. There's a reason why Penn State brought him back. James Franklin. This is the first time James Franklin has brought a player back who left Penn State from the portal, and there's a reason for that. One, because there's a need at safety. Zaki Wheatley, we saw him, especially down the stretch, especially in that Notre Dame game, play his tail off. And he really performed well for Penn State last season. But you lose Jalen Reed. KJ Winston, after the season-ending injury last year, is off to the NFL as well. So there's an opening at safety. Now there's other players who are able to fill that spot. Dejan Lane. There's Babu Toure has gotten some pub so far this winter. I don't know if either of them on your list. I don't want to steal him, Bob, but King Mack, if he's able to tap in to the talent that he had as a high school prospect, and a Penn State and Poindexter, Penn State safeties coach, is able to bottle that up and use it on the defense, and Jim Knowles is able to use him in fun ways, I could see him being a guy at the end of spring camp that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned there at the tail end Anthony Poindexter, because don't discount his impact on potential breakout players. Because if you look how at King Mack's skill set, whether it's his speed, his ability, he's a physical player, I believe, from Florida. But if you just look since in the last couple of years, what Dex has been able to do with players, some of them were kind of coveted players. Kevin Winston obviously was, but two JUCOs, Jaquan Brisker, Jair Brown, they were JUCOs. Even a kid like Wheatley, who last year was really a clear-cut third safety behind Jalen and Winston. But the minute he got elevated, the minute that Penn State needed him early in the season, this was a guy that got better and better every game. And I think you have to give Poindexter, a two-time All-American safety at Virginia, a lot of credit for getting guys up to speed in all facets of the game. And you mentioned Jim Knowles. He wants to use 5 and 6 DB sets depending on the down and distance. I think King Mack was absolutely on my list, and he is a guy that literally could go from not on anyone's radar a couple of months ago to somebody who is just a key part of what's going to be a very fast defense. I really like that call, Johnny. I think we've gone defense. I'm going to go defense a third time, but I am not going to take Max Rouse. If Max Rouse was not headed to Japan right now, you and I, we both know who he would have at the top of his list. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to be a spoiler, but I'm going to go in a different direction. Same position. I'm going to go Jalen Harvey. He is a guy that has intrigued me, an edge rusher. Maybe there's some other guys that they're looking at as well, but it is such a critical position now with Penn State losing Abdul Carter, Amin Vanover getting ready for the draft, Smith Dilbert, a late addition to the transfer portal. There's high hopes for a veteran Zariah Fisher, but he's got an injury history. He's got to stay healthy. They're going to need a couple of young defensive ends to step up. I know we've talked about it before. I think they really like Jalen Harvey. he flashed. We were both at the Purdue game. He had a tackle for loss in that game. It was a blowout. I think he also survived. He got dinged up in that game, but he was able. It wasn't a serious injury. I liked what I saw from him. I think he's got the physical tools, and I do think when you consider Penn State wants to play at least 5 defensive ends in a rotation, especially in a long season that's supposed to be a long season. I think at some point, I think Penn State fans are really going to like what they see from Jalen Harvey. I think he can break out. I'm not saying he's going to start, but I think he's going to go from a player that really did not play much at all, obviously, in 2024, to a player that they're going to count on as part of a key rotation piece.
I like it. And we all know who Max would have picked.
Yes.
His fellow namesake, Max Granville, who I could easily see being the star of spring camp.
Yep.
Do you want to talk about him? Because I'm sure he's on your list.
We can talk about him. I just think for the fan base, I think we want to give some maybe not so obvious picks that, they're kind of wildcatting if we were in the oil business, but I do think we should absolutely talk about Max. We do not want to bury the lead, man. This kid's really good. And I think, what he was able to do basically during his final year of high school because of the reclassification.
Yeah,
he looks the part.
I was going to say, I'll take 2 back-to-back because I'll talk about Max Granville, but then I'll talk about someone else at his position that you actually mentioned, who I think is a true wild card and a true, breakout star in his own way. But Max Granville, like you mentioned, Bob, reclassifying right before last season, this kid should have been a high school senior. One of the highest rated defensive ends in his recruiting class, in the 2025 recruiting class, comes in a few weeks, maybe a few days, if I remember correctly, before the season even starts. And of course, there's an acclimation period, right? For a player like that, you get thrusted in to college practice. You're going up against Nolan Rucci and Donko and Shelton when, just a few months, a few weeks prior, you were going up against guys who are probably 60, 70 pounds lighter than them. And so that period of acclimation, that takes time. But the fact that he made his way onto the field and earning some actually meaningful reps as well, down the stretch into the college football playoff, that experience does so much for you as a young player. And now you have a winter workouts, a full set of sessions with Chuck Losey and that strength and conditioning staff. And you've got a full spring practice. And you've got opportunity ahead of you without Abdul Carter, without Amin Vanover, without Smith Vilbert. So I think he is he's my number 1 pick. I mean, he's truly, I know I mentioned King Mac first, but I was just kind of building off the secondary there. Max Granville is the guy who I think has the best chance of being a young player who we are really talking about being a breakout star, not just in spring, but for the 2025 season. To piggyback on that really quick, a guy you mentioned who I want to mention is Zuriah Fisher. And a lot of guys that we've mentioned already are younger players. Jalen Harvey, Max Granville, Elliot Washington and King Mac aren't necessarily young, but they're stepping into a starting role or a bigger role. But Zuriah Fisher, he misses most of the 2022 season with an injury. He misses all of last year with an injury. Don't forget that he provided a spark for this Penn State defensive front as a rotational piece in 2023, 3.5 sacks, and that's working behind Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter, and Amin Vanover was in the mix as well. Zuriah Fisher, if he stays healthy, and he already got recognized by Deion Barnes as, I believe it was the first winter workouts competitor of the day, quote unquote, grain of salt and all that. But if he, a 6-year senior who not a lot of people are talking about, should have made my list of top 25 guys to watch for spring and didn't. But he is a player who I think can provide some senior leadership to this group and can provide some serious, pass rushing ability and edge setting ability for a group that's going to be really young. That, like we're talking about, Max Granville's, Jalen Harvey, maybe even Malachi Williams getting into the mix. But I like Zuriah Fisher as a guy that we're talking about it in a pleasant light after spring camp, after he missed so much time.
Yeah, Johnny, let's hope, let's hope he gets a chance to showcase what he can do. I think he's talked about within the program, and I think that it really compromised, unfortunately, by some significant injuries. Very, very unfortunate. I would say a couple of things. I think we've listed 5 players. I think we touted this live thing as 10. We might go 11, but we meant to go 10. So it's really the spirit of this contest. I also want to say, Johnny, when I considered breakout players, I went with players that I saw with my own eyes. So in case fans are wondering, and maybe you have them on your list, I wasn't really ready to talk about the transfer of wideouts, only because, Devontae Ross was at Troy. Kyron Hudson played against Penn State last year at USC. I didn't really consider them just because I really want to kind of just watch them a little bit. But obviously, they would be, if you want to talk about breakout players, they would certainly be on this list. But I just stuck with guys maybe that we have seen, couple of wild cards. But one player that is a wideout that I know that you had on your list that I just want to bring up because we're on a nice little defensive player tear here. Is Tyseer Denmark, the second-year wideout from Imhotep, that I think, when you combine his talent with the way that some of the teammates talked about him either late last season or there was an availability earlier this year where we've got to meet the second-year players and talk to them, or just the coaches kind of talk about him. He's a guy that can do a lot of things. I'll never forget him because it was his touchdown catch on the final play of the Maryland game, Johnny, that I think caused some pretty hard feelings between the head coaches, Mike Loxley and James Franklin. I think anyone that was on the field picked up on that heat. But anyway, this is a guy that could do a lot of things, I think, for Penn State. Tyseer, key member of the rotation, even with the transfer guys. But also he could probably impact the return game. Clearly for me, a guy that I'd be stunned if he's healthy, Johnny, with what he can do, the Imhotep kid. I'd be stunned if we don't hear his teammates and maybe some coaches talking about the spring that he's had and the expectations they had for him. If he can kind of add on with a strong August showing.
I was just muted there for a second. I've been a little under the weather, so I think I coughed once or twice, and I didn't want the listeners to have to hear that. So
he's playing hurt. That's all we can ask for from Johnny McGonigal. But I know that you like Tyseer too.
I do. I really do. Tyseer Denmark, at both stops in high school, Roman and Imhotep, showed a lot of really good things. And when you come in as a freshman receiver, and he came in late, he wasn't here for winter workouts or spring camp last year. That puts you behind the eight ball, not just in terms of individual and personal development, but also building a rapport with your starting quarterback, with Drew Aller. And now that Harrison Wallace and Amari Evans are gone, obviously they're looking for guys to step up, and they might go back in to the spring transfer portal window. Once that opens in April, I wouldn't be surprised if they do. I would actually be surprised if they don't. But Tyseer Denmark, man, this is an opportunity for you to step up. This is an opportunity for a lot of these wide receivers to step up. And I know, Bob, you said you were going to lay off or stay away and I totally get it. Get it. But I'm going to bring up one of the two transfer wide receivers, and that's Devontae Ross, because this is a guy I've seen because I'm a sicko and I watch Sunbelt football. I watch all
that Iowa game, baby. Look out.
Exactly. Yeah. No, Devontae Ross, though, you just look at the numbers, you look at the film. He's a playmaker. He's a guy who can take the top off of defense. Quick, shifty, has a lot of speed. I mean, that comes with the territory when you explode for 76 catches, over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns. He had at least one catch of 26 plus yards in 7 of 12 games. Troy was looking for him to always make the play, on offense. And that's what this Penn State offense needs. That's what this back needs, is someone who can stretch the field, someone who can take a 5 to 6 yard catch and turn it into 50 or 60. Amari Evans, when they schemed it up, really that skinny post or that skinny seam route that he would run off play action sometimes, they were able to scheme that up quite a bit. We saw it against Boise State. We saw it throughout the season. But I don't know. I just think something more consistent, a guy who can make those kind of plays, and not just the 50, 60 yarders, right? But the turning 3 into 12 or turning, 8 into 15, 16. Penn State really didn't have that last year at the wide receiver position. At least they had it in Tyler Warren. They won't this upcoming season. Devontae Ross is a guy who, I'm really looking forward to seeing those open practice sessions in spring. I don't know how many we're really going to get and how much we're really going to see, but looking forward to seeing Devontae Ross put on a Penn State uniform and go to work.
Yeah, Johnny, and when you think about James Franklin's time in-state college. I think this is now, I think it's year 12. I always get confused, but I believe it's year 12. He came here in 2014. So the fans can do the math and make fun of me, all throughout the day. When you think about his best receivers, whether it was, Chris Godwin, whether it was KJ Hamler, whether it was Jahan Dotson, they were all threats to take it the distance on any play. But what also I thought separated them was it wasn't just that part of their game. They were guys that had a route tree that secondaries had to deal with. Chris Godwin would go across the middle. KJ Hamler, if in that 2018 game against Ohio State, that 93-yard touchdown catch and run, that was a short pass that he took to the house. I think he split a couple of guys. It's not just just Penn State fans just don't think of it. Drew Aller throwing 60-yard bombs to Devontae Ross, because eventually Big Ten secondaries are going to catch on. It's going to be really tough to just throw it over really good corners and safeties' heads. But Jahan Dotson too is another player. It's run after catch. What else can you do besides run 4-4? Can you beat somebody? Can you break a tackle? Can you turn a potential 8-yard gain into a 28-yard gain? And that's, I think, really what they're looking for. Not just a vertical threat, like this guy is a vertical threat, but a complete wideout, maybe, or close to it. And maybe in the offseason, they can kind of refine a little bit about what they do. Kyron Hudson as well. So excited to see him. And I just hope that he can bring more than just one dimension, maybe, Johnny, to the Penn State offense. Let's just stay on the offensive side. And these are probably two of my more captain obvious picks, but we're not gonna just overlook these guys. They're both second-year players. They both they both made contributions in 2024. One more so than other. But the guy that we have to talk about, just because of Tyler Warren moving on, it's Luke. It's Luke Reynolds. Like he's a guy that, man, for him to do what he did as a true freshman, for him to add the weight that he did, and for him to step up when they needed him to, because Andrew Rappelier got hurt early in the season. Just, you can't say enough about somebody like that. If you think about where Tyler Warren was in his first year, or Theo Johnson, or even Mike Gesicki were in their first year, it's very rare when you see somebody flash at that position in his first year. Freiermuth was able to do it, I think, in 2018. Reynolds was close to doing that. I think that he is only going to get better as he fills out. He's going to have a major role, an impactful role as a runner, not as a runner, as a blocker and as a receiver. I'm curious to see how that develops. But I do think you could see his athleticism even on the fake punt. Like he was motoring pretty good for a guy his size. He's definitely a breakout player. I don't think it was a true breakout season for him last year, but I do think what he's going to mean to this offense compared to what he was last year, I think I would define him as a legit breakout, huge step forward guy.
Absolutely. I mean, we've written enough about him already. When we got the chance to I know you got the chance to talk to Luke Reynolds right out at the Fiesta Bowl about that fake punt, about his progress through his true freshman season, coming in as a 5-star prospect who I think he told us a few weeks ago, or I guess it's a month ago at this point when we talked to him again, at Penn State, first time on campus for the last year's freshman, talking to these guys. He told us that he threw maybe 3 blocks as a high school senior, glorified receiver, right? Wide receiver. But the fact that he came in and progressed the way he did, developed the way he did, and learned the offense, had a role with this team, especially down the stretch. I keep saying down the stretch, but when you're looking at guys who are moving into spring camp now and next season, you want to take a look at how they progressed and how they got better throughout the year. Luke Reynolds absolutely got better when Andrew Rappelier went down and he was thrust into a bigger role. Andrew Rappelier is my guy. Is not a guy over Luke Reynolds. Like I think the ceiling is so high for Luke Reynolds, and I really would not be surprised at all if he becomes a true stud at tight end as a sophomore. This is more of just a wild card pick. It's like, in fantasy football, when you're drafting and the guy who got hurt the year before just goes lower in the draft because he's coming off an injury. and people are a little hesitant to pull the trigger on him and take him. And it's like, yeah, sure, I'll take Chris Godwin in the 7th round. Like, absolutely. This is it for Andrew Rappelier for me. Coming off the injury that he did, and we haven't really gotten much of an update on him other than before the Notre Dame game. We're watching warm-ups down there, and he wasn't in full pads or anything, but he wasn't on crutches either. He was catching passes from Drew Aller in the end zone, in just sweats and a t-shirt, whatever it was. But it looked like he was like, he's not encumbered by crutches or anything like that. So for him, coming off a serious injury like he was in a position to make a big impact on this team last year before the injury. He's a guy who we were all talking about after spring camp, throughout summer, going into training camp as a breakout candidate in this room, or the next guy up behind Tyler Warren. And I totally get why the conversation has shifted towards Luke Reynolds, because he had flashed that much, and the ceiling and the potential is absolutely there. I'm just saying, let's not forget about Andrew Rappelier, the guy who was in his recruiting class a couple of years ago, the number 3 tight end in the country. This is a loaded room, a lot of talent that Ty Howell has to work with.
Yeah. All right, I like that pick, and I do think, you're right, Johnny. If he had not have gotten hurt last year, it's fair to wonder how much we would have even seen of Luke. It was how Luke embraced his opportunity that I think really set himself apart, because he was the number 4 tight end, I think, before Andrew got hurt. And man, he literally took the ball and run with it. I'm going to hate myself tomorrow for saying that on this podcast, and I'm sure Penn State fans are going to give me guff about it, but I did say it. I'm going to stick by it. Johnny, let's just do 2 more as we're sailing along through this breakout list. Some really good candidates. I'm tempted to talk about a second-year linebacker, but I wanted to just make sure. I want to make sure we talk about Cooper Cousins. So I'm gonna nominate him. They could not be more thrilled, I think, with the second-year offensive lineman than they could be with Cooper Cousins. And I think part of the reason why, Johnny, was the minute he enrolled on campus early, he never really acted or looked like a second-year offensive lineman. He talked to me out at the Fiesta Bowl about his commitment to being the biggest, best offensive lineman he could be, and what that would take, gaining weight and eating extra meals and lifting, and then lifting some more, and then lifting and some more. And he just has embraced the challenge. He is not running away from it. Penn State's recruited offensive line, I think, very well the last couple of years. And they have a really good group of offensive linemen coming back. But I just think this guy is so determined and just so motivated. It's going to be really, really hard. I think you said this last week. It's going to be hard to keep this guy off the field. And that early schedule, they're going to look at a lot of offensive linemen early in the season because they're heavy favorites in their first 3 games at home. That's going to allow, Troutwine, and Kodolnicki, James Franklin, it's going to allow those guys to take a long look at what these guys are doing in games. It's a really a ideal environment for our breakout picks in September to really showcase what they can do. And I do think that Cooper Cousins is absolutely going to be by the end of the year, I would not be surprised if he's one of Penn State's best 5.
100% agree. Check mark every single thing. The amount that we've written and talked about Cooper Cousins, even dating back to this time last year, because he was a winter workout beast. He was a leader in his recruiting class, a guy who we came away from spring camp impressed by this time last year. Everything we've written about him, and every word that we've spoken on this podcast about Cooper Cousins has been warranted, has been earned, has been deserved. And I would be stunned if he's not a starter for this offensive line this upcoming season. And I think he's a pillar of the offensive line moving forward, because you're talking about an offensive line that's just getting older, right?
Yeah.
Brings back 4 or 5 starters for this upcoming season. But beyond that, Cooper Cousins has the ability to be that guy you can really lean on in 2026. I think the second-year linebacker you're going to go with is Mr. number 40, Anthony Specca. Yeah, let's talk about him. Let's wrap
Yeah.
it up with Anthony Specca because he wears 40 for a reason, right? Dan
Yeah.
Connor was his idol growing up, was his guy, and I think he has. I mean, we're talking about the program's all-time leading tackler in Dan Connor. Now his linebackers coach. Things come full circle, but Anthony Specca has it in between the ears, and he was a top prospect coming out of Central Catholic in Pittsburgh, and he has all the tools to make it happen.
Yeah, he's just what I'm most curious about him because he knew that these high school linebackers are not when they come out they're not they need to be built up to be college Big Ten linebackers. So all of them all of them need to gain weight as quickly as possible. But A, it's got to be good weight, um, and B, not everyone gains weight the way Tony Rojas did a couple of years ago when he gained about 30 pounds in 12 hours or something like that. I still can't get over James Franklin talking about what he arrived at. I think he arrived early and what he was, coming out of winter workouts. But it turned out when we got to look at him, it was true. He was a high school tailback and a linebacker who looked like a linebacker. So my curiosity about Specca is just I think they listed him in the high 220s last year. If he can get close to mid 230s, maybe a little bit more, I think then he will definitely be equipped to be kind of what he wants to be, and that's to be something in the neighborhood of Dan Connor, the all-time leading tackler at Penn State. But there's also other linebackers I think that are going to be heard from as breakout picks. But I do think Specca, it's got that look about him, and those Western PA linebackers that play at Penn State, they're really hard to dismiss.
They are, and especially when you mentioned the weight that he put on. Again, we're like a lot of guys. There's a common thread with a lot of these players we've talked about, Bob. The younger players, the second year players, are guys who didn't enroll early last year. I mean, Cooper Cousins did, but Denmark didn't. Specca didn't. Like they
Yeah,
missed, and this is something that we need to, and we have emphasized before, but we have to emphasize again is how important those months and those weeks and those workouts and those practices are
yeah,
for these younger players when they enroll early. And when you go to a Central Catholic who you got to finish, they don't like some schools don't allow to early graduation, and so when you miss that time, you're behind the eight ball a little bit.
yeah.
But now that he has that time, and now that he has the opportunity, because Kobe King is gone, Kobe King is off to the NFL. You've got Tony Rojas coming back, you've got Dom DeLuca coming back. Is
Mm-hmm.
DeLuca going to slide over to the middle when they're in a base 4-3? Is Rojas going to take that opportunity? Who's going to have the green dot on their helmet
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
communication? Right? It could be Anthony Specca. Like it could be Specca. And this is a guy who Dan Connor loves. When I went out to Central Catholic to talk to Anthony Specca, this is a couple years ago now, I guess, a couple summers ago. He raved about Dan Connor and their relationship and how they get along. And you can just tell there's just a mutual respect and relationship there. And going from recruit to player is a little different, especially now that Dan Connor is his formal,
yeah.
linebackers coach, not just an analyst on the staff, even though he did a lot as an analyst. But really intrigued by what Anthony Specca has ahead of him, the opportunity ahead of him, and the player that he can be for this defense.
John, I don't know about you, but I feel like this was a pretty special edition of the Blue White Breakdown. We went live. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But I mean, I think we were projected to do 10. I think we did closer to about 38. But I also say I think it speaks to the talent and it speaks to the development and the recruiting that James and his staff have done. Where this is a really good team, but there are some players that are itching to get, become more of the faces of Penn State football, and a lot of them are young players. Some of them might be transfers, but it's really about recruiting and development at Penn State. They've done it well, and I think it's a pretty solid list. I think we can look back on this at this time next year and see how we did. I'm sure we're not going to hit on all of them. I especially like the Zariah Fisher pick. I really think that was a warranted pick of an older player because they break out just as much sometimes as the younger players. So I enjoyed this. I hope you are feeling better. And then in a couple of weeks we're actually going to be dealing with spring practice.
Absolutely, Bob. I can't wait. You said we'll revisit it next year. Maybe we revisit it in April after the blue-white game, and see if any of these guys,
Yeah.
came out of spring camp with some compliments and all that from the coaching staff. Because we'll talk to these guys. We'll talk to James Franklin and hopefully all the assistant coaches throughout spring camp and see who is really making that progress. But something we'll revisit for sure. We'll be back Monday with another edition of the Blue-White Breakdown presented by Penn Live. For now, Johnny McGonigal, Bob Flounders, enjoy your weekend, everybody.